Will the gentlelady yield for a question?
No, I will not yield to one of your stupid questions that are always attacking me and attacking President Trump.
How about a mediocre question?
No, I don't want to. I do not want
an
your
excellent question.
No.
A smart question.
No, my time.
An intelligent question.
You have no smart or intelligent questions.
My colleague once tried to talk about the safety of D.C. When she literally supported an insurrection and attack on the Capitol, visited the prisoners. I was there as one of 2 Democrats there as part of that visit on behalf of this committee, and seeing her high five folks that want to overthrow our government. So quite ridiculous.
Do you know what we're here for? You know we're here about AG.
I don't think you know what you're here for.
Well, you the one talking about.
I think your fake eyelashes are messing up.
No,
what you're
ain't
reading.
nothing.
Hold on.
Listen.
Order.
Mr. Chairman,
That's beneath
would
even
you
your
please
history.
regain
Beneath
order
even
of your
you.
committee?
Order.
Mr. I do have a point of order, and I would like to move to take down Ms. Greene's words. That is absolutely unacceptable. How dare you attack the physical appearance of another person?
Are your feelings hurt?
Her words down.
Aw.
Oh, girl, baby girl.
Oh, really?
Don't even play. with
Baby
me.
girl? I don't think
we are going to
so.
move, and we're going to take your words down.
I second that motion.
So who will have to?
I'm just curious, just to better understand your ruling. If someone on this committee then starts talking about somebody's bleach blonde, bad built butch body, that would not be engaging in personalities, correct?
A what now?
Chairman, I make a motion to strike those words.
I don't think that's
Hold on.
part
I'm
of the.
trying to find clarification on what qualifies.
Chairman, motion to strike those
I had no idea what
words.
you just said.
We're not gonna do this. Look, you guys earlier literally just.
You just voted to do
Y'all did
it.
it first, so you don't want to talk about
voted
it.
to do it.
Order.
I'm trying to get clarification.
Look at calm down. Calm down.
No, because this
I
is
would
what
like to
y'all
get
do.
through proceedings.
So I'm trying to get
Ms.
clarification.
Crockett, you're not
Y'all wanna
recognized.
play
Ms.
games?
Crockett.
I can't hear you with your
And
yelling.
You don't want
calm
me to
down.
Be,
Can
no,
you please calm
don't
down?
tell me to calm down.
Calm down.
Because y'all
Please
talk
calm
noise,
down.
and then you
You're
can't
out of
take
control.
Because if
Look,
I
Chairman,
come
can we
and
send
talk
take a
about
break
her,
for 5
y'all
minutes?
gonna have a
Mr.
problem.
Chairman, Mr. Chairman.
All right,
Sorry.
Chair.
I don't know why
Okay.
you're
Order.
acting
Chair
like
now
that.
recognizes
Not cute.
Ms. Greene for 4 minutes and 21 seconds.
Ladies and gentlemen, in this special nighttime episode, we resume the Madcap comedy mystery series called Comer's High Crimes and Misadventures, the hilarious quest to impeach a president who has done nothing wrong, an avowedly low-budget but multi-million-dollar taxpayer-funded production which most Americans assumed had ended 2 months ago and had completely forgotten about. But tonight, with the cast and crew now fresh back from a surprise
You mean
trip
like
to
the
New York
January
City,
6th committee?
Stop it.
I'd like my time restored to me, Mr. Chairman.
Order. Chair recognizes ranking member.
Real obstruction was Trump and his administration refusing to provide information Congress requested in more than 100 different congressional investigations and inquiries. And I know that pleases the gentlelady from Georgia because he issued.
I just want to hear Joe Biden. Why can't the American people hear him?
Order, Mr. Chairman. Get her under control.
The form of the resolution is as follows. Declaring the office of Speaker of the House of Representatives to be vacant. This is the uniparty for the American people watching.
Gentlelady will suspend.
Mike Johnson put forth 7 tenets that would guide the conference under his speakership. Restore trust by ensuring total transparency, open processes, and regular order.
Will suspend. The House will be in order.
On both occasions, the majority of the majority.
Gentlelady will suspend.
Speaker Johnson refused to continue this important process. He instead led us to another CR on January 18th, 2024, and got it passed with the support of 207 Democrats. And
Speaker, the House is not in order.
removing this uniparty speaker will not give the speaker's gavel to the Democrats, which would only happen if Republicans actually vote for Hakeem Jeffries.
House will be in order.
Madam Speaker, I rise in strong support of HRES 863, impeaching Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. My Democrat colleagues argue that one cannot be impeached over policy differences. Well, I argue that breaking our laws is more than just policy differences. 300 dead Americans every day from fentanyl poisoning is more than just a policy difference. It's murder. He has violated his oath of office and breached the public trust by willfully refusing to ensure the laws passed by Congress and signed into law by the President are faithfully executed as required by Article 2 of the Constitution. He has allowed over 10 million illegal border crossers to invade our country, approximately 2 million of whom are known gotaways. These are people who have completely evaded U.S. authorities and are roaming the interior of the American communities, assaulting, raping, and murdering Americans. And God help us if we have a terrorist attack on our land.
The Trump-Putin mega faction, headed up by the distinguished gentlelady from Georgia, has been given this worthless trinket of a consolation prize, the opportunity to bring a slapstick impeachment drive against a cabinet member of unimpeachable integrity who has obviously committed no treason, no bribery, no high crimes, no misdemeanors, nothing indictable or even indictable, if you prefer. What makes this farce a tragedy is that Secretary Mayorkas and the U.S. Senate have been working for months to achieve precisely the immigration and border compromise the GOP has been demanding. And miraculously, they got to a bipartisan immigration agreement for billions of dollars more in Border Patrol officers, immigration judges, fentanyl detection machines, a far tougher border. It was good enough for Senator Mitch McConnell and dozens of GOP senators, and it was good enough for the Wall Street Journal, but the House MAGAs would not take yes for an answer. Why? Because Donald Trump doesn't want a border solution. He wants a border problem, nothing else to run on. And Vladimir Putin certainly doesn't want $60 billion going to the heroic people of Ukraine, defying his filthy imperialist invasion. All over the world, democracy and freedom are under siege today, and all our colleagues can think to do is to sell out our Democratic allies and sell out the cause of human rights, and then impeach a cabinet secretary working diligently to solve the immigration problem that they claim to care about.
I'm not a doctor, but I have a PhD in recognizing bull when I hear it. I'd like to point out to everyone that we knew early on, as a matter of fact, everyone knew early on, that the people that were at risk of hospitalization and dying of COVID were those that were obese, had diabetes, were over the age of 65. We also knew that children were at no risk, practically zero risk of being hospitalized or deaths from COVID-19. We knew that young people, healthy young people, were not at risk. However, Dr. Marks, you rushed through this process of authorizing these vaccines, even though you knew the side effects, you knew about myocarditis, and you knew about the studies. So let's be very real about the situation that we have. It's time to be honest about the vaccine injured, and we need to stop allowing these COVID-19 vaccines to be given out to children.
Gentlelady's time has expired.
It's really unfortunate that we're actually here having this hearing trying to poke holes and cause more vaccine hesitancy amongst the public. But we know that we're here because committee members on this committee have demanded that we have this hearing, and we continue to cave and give those members everything that they want. The fact that we are now having parents that are choosing to vaccinate their kids less than before because of all of the attacks on vaccinations is shameful, and it's shameful that members of Congress continue to put down vaccinations as an opportunity to get our communities healthier.
The question today is, do you trust the government? We often hear the claim that it's for your safety. And anytime the government tells us it's for your safety, the American people really question what that means. The same intelligence community that spied on President Trump's campaign has been deeply invested in reauthorizing FISA. And the same intelligence community that wrote the letter lying, saying that the Hunter Biden's laptop is not real, deeply wants FISA reauthorized. And if the government really cared about protecting Americans, then they would shut the border down and mass deport terrorists out of our country. and criminal illegal aliens. But they're not doing that. No, they're telling us we've got to reauthorize FISA so the government can continue to spy on Americans.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to read from an article from a few days ago. This is from Fox 5 in Atlanta. The headline, Marjorie Taylor Greene standing by eclipse, NE earthquake comments. Georgia Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene is standing by comments she made about last week's earthquake in the Northeast and Monday's eclipse. Again, this is quoting from the article here, that the Republican representative then posted on Twitter, the social media site formerly known as X, formerly known as Twitter, that, quote, God is sending America strong signs to tell us to repent. Greene also pointed to Monday's eclipse, saying there are, quote, many more things to come, end quote. So to the extent that my friend from Kentucky was looking for me to make a connection here to the debate that we're having, I suspect it's self-evident, but I'm not so sure that the American people should necessarily be taking much stock into the arguments that are being made by my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, including the speaker that we just heard from.
Now, I want to address something else that went on in this committee by another member.
It's amazing to me that just in a few years' time, it's now considered misinformation to talk about the Nazis in Ukraine. I don't think anyone in the United States government, Americans, do not support actual Nazis or white supremacists. I know I certainly do not. And I can't understand why in just a short amount of time, this information that our own American media frequently talked about is no longer talked about. I'd like to point out also, here's an NBC article stating that Ukraine's Nazi problem is real. Mr. Snyder, do you see this headline? This is NBC News. They say that Ukraine's Nazi problem is real, even if Putin's denazification claim is not. So even our own American media, unless you consider NBC or Time Magazine misinformation spreaders or disinformation media outlets, this is contrary to what you testified.
I say this as someone whose grandparents escaped the Holocaust. So my grandmother was part of the Kindertransport out of Germany. Her parents were killed in Auschwitz. My grandfather, her husband, escaped Poland from the pogroms. You know, the idea that we pretend that behavior is acceptable and regular. There are no concentration camps in Ukraine. They're not taking babies and shooting them in the air because they're Jewish. There's no gas chambers. There's no ovens. They're not railing people in. They're not ripping gold out of people's mouth. They're not taking stuff out of their home. They're not trying to erase a people. They're Ukrainians. Stop bringing up Nazis and Hitler. The only people who know about Nazis and Hitler are the 10 million people and their families who lost their loved ones, generations of people who were wiped out. It is enough of this disgusting behavior using Nazis as propaganda. You want to talk about Nazis? Get yourself over to the Holocaust Museum. You go see what Nazis did. It's despicable that we use that and we allow it and we sit here like somehow it's regular.
Before I get into it, it's interesting to hear my colleague just now talk about disavowing white supremacists when in 2022, she spoke at an event led by white supremacist and white nationalist Nick Fuentes, and when asked about it, doubled down on it and said, we're gonna focus on people, not labels. So get out of here with that damn hypocrisy. And Dr. Snyder, I'm gonna give you some time to respond.
First of all, I'd like to thank the representative from Georgia by making clear with her comments and with her person that any discussion of political warfare has to include Russia, Ukraine, and America. She's just demonstrated that point, I think, very powerfully.
See, the problem that we're having, and the reason that we're bringing up Russia as well, is because Russia is a threat as well as China. So we are not going to sit here and pretend as if it's only one or the other. But the biggest problem that we have is we have people that sit in this chamber and they spread the misinformation. If it was left in Russia or China, whatever. But the problem is that you have people that sit in positions of power and they They have a $2 million budget. You think that they would call on some staff to find out if they were telling the truth about the things that they're putting on social media, but instead it works for their rhetoric. And as we talk about rhetoric, something else that was appalling to me was this insinuation that when you look at the Ukrainians, which is why we're having problems getting the funding that Ukraine needs, is because people in this chamber push misinformation and disinformation. They want to talk about the Ukrainians got all of these Nazis. Well, let me tell you something. You can find Nazis anywhere. You can find them right here in the United States. In fact, a bunch of the people that they're calling victims and prisoners of war, also known as convicted felons from January 6th, I have an article that I'd like to enter into the record by unanimous consent that says neo-Nazi January 6th rioter pleads guilty.
Without objection.
Thank you so much. So here's the point. We have people in this chamber that are actually causing just as much a threat, if not more of a threat, to our own country. We should be talking about holding our very own accountable for the misinformation and disinformation that they are spreading, whether it's coming out of China, whether it's coming out of Russia, or whoever is peddling it. It is a problem because right now what we see is that people are dying and we cannot get the support that we need from the public because they continue to peddle lies. And I'm tired of it because I didn't come to this chamber to play games. I came to this chamber to answer to the people, the American people, and to make sure that we keep the American people safe.
Let's go back to your very own email. You said earlier you don't use email. Oh, you do. Right here. This is your own email where you said the typical mask you buy in the drugstore is not really effective in keeping out virus. I do not recommend that you wear a mask. This is your email. This is your own words. But yet children all over America were forced to wear masks. Healthy children forced to wear masks, muzzled in their schools. And then they were forced to learn from home because of your so-called science and your medical suggestions while you and all your cronies get paid from Big Pharma. You know that what this committee should be doing? We should be recommending you to be prosecuted. We should be writing a criminal referral because you should be prosecuted for crimes against humanity. You belong in prison, Dr. Fauci.
I'm going to point a few things out. Even before this committee started, this same member that just went on this rant introduced the Fire Fauci Act and promoted it on a podcast, saying that COVID was a bioweapon. That is how insane some of these comments are. And I want to quote this. This is a quote from the same member. I don't believe in evolution. These viruses were not making people sick until they created them. They weaponize these viruses to be able to attach to our cells and make us sick. It's a bioweapon. The they created them, sir, is you. They are attacking you and our medical community for actually creating COVID that has caused the deaths of millions. And we know that these extreme comments are targeting public health officials across the country. I also want to show you this other comment. Same member who just attacked you. The Fauci-funded Wuhan lab created the virus. This is so crazy and irresponsible. In this post, the same member of this committee is accusing you of orchestrating a global conspiracy to create COVID on purpose just to make people get vaccines. That you've done this, sir. This same member routinely promotes complete misinformation about vaccines and actually has encouraged the routine prevention of vaccinations that even eliminate diseases like the measles.
Americans have been enslaved in $34.8 trillion in debt. And one of the reasons is because of the reckless spending of the Biden administration, all due to climate cultist beliefs that they have got to regulate and spend hard-earned tax dollars in order to control the climate. This is a complete catastrophe, Mr. Reagan. It's a complete catastrophe. And it needs to be undone. The EPA regulations are unsustainable for Americans. And believe me, Republicans want clean air and water too. But the climate cult has got to end.
I just want to make 3 points in closing. The first is that Americans want the EPA to be doing more to stop climate change, not less. And yet, we heard from a number of our colleagues on the GOP side today, as well as from Project 2025, that EPA's rules are hurting Americans. But that's not the perspective most Americans have. Most Americans want the EPA to be doing more. We have a philosophical difference or a scientific difference. We believe that climate change is real and is a dagger pointed at the throat of humanity. And too many of our colleagues agree with the erudite gentlelady from Georgia who calls climate scientists, and most Americans by extension, climate cultists. We heard it twice from her today. Well, if there are brainwashed cultists on the issue, it is the people who are following the conspiracy theories of QAnon and assert that scientists like Dr. Fauci are trying to invent diseases. That's where the cultists come in.
Chair recognizes Ms. Greene from Georgia for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Excuse me, Hunter. Apparently you're afraid of my words.
Whoa! Oh.
I'd like to reclaim my time, Mr. Chairman. This is pictures that Hunter Biden had produced and uploaded to porn websites, and it's marked out.
Mr. Chairman, point of parliamentary inquiry.
Showing
Point of
proof
parliamentary inquiry, Mr.
proof
Chairman.
of Mann
Okay.
Act violations. Democrats should not be offended by pictures
Mr.
that
Chairman,
black out.
have I been
things.
recognized?
They should be
Objection. I
offended
have a
by
point of
actual
parliamentary
human
inquiry.
trafficking. Here are some of Secretary Mayorkas's effective results. Approximately 10 million illegal border crossers from over 160 countries have invaded the United States since President Biden took office and Secretary Mayorkas started his job. Do you believe that Secretary Mayorkas's actions and refusal to enforce the laws warrant impeachment?
Absolutely, Congresswoman.
He has failed to perform and is culpably inefficient, yes.
The Secretary is acting in violation of the law and constitutional order.
Thank you very much. I yield back my time, Mr. Chairman.
You want to talk policy? Let's talk policy. I agree we have problems at the border. Let's talk about how we can solve them. But instead of actually going over to the Senate, this committee, which has the Committee of Jurisdiction over border policy that is being negotiated right now by a bipartisan group in the Senate with Secretary Mayorkas, instead of actually engaging in those substantive negotiations to reach some sort of a bipartisan agreement to address the problems, we are sitting here with a charade of a sham impeachment hearing with expert impeachment witnesses who are Republican officials, political officials suing the Department of Homeland Security. Another hearing. It's the same hearing we've had 10, 12 times. Same pig, different lipstick, because we're now going to call it an impeachment hearing.
Secretary Mayorkas's actions and decisions clearly meet the standard necessary for initiating impeachment proceedings. The actions, policies, and statements of Secretary Mayorkas easily meet that standard, and the American people completely agree, especially the witnesses that we've had before this committee, these parents who have had children murdered by fentanyl, murdered by illegal aliens, such as MS-13 crime gang members.
We should certainly, I think, be embarrassed to be here today. This is a complete sham impeachment. I also like to point out that the previous speaker on this committee has been spending a lot of her time actually fundraising off of this impeachment effort. And so the fact that she's posturing to taking it seriously, I think, is quite a joke as well.
This Republican-led House is an unmitigated disaster. I would say it's a clown show, but that would be a disservice to actual working clowns. They're acting like spoiled, rotten children who got what they want and still can't take yes for an answer. But they own all of this now. And if anyone needs more proof than that, look no further than the sponsor of this resolution, Marjorie Taylor Greene, a MAGA extremist who amplifies Holocaust deniers, who said 9/11 was a hoax, who says wildfires are started by Jewish space lasers. That's the legislative and intellectual force behind this impeachment resolution. In fact, if it passes, she's going to be an impeachment manager on the floor of the United States Senate. God help us. It's just more proof that this is fraudulent, unconstitutional garbage. But Donald Trump wants another fraudulent impeachment, another distraction from his own legal troubles, another excuse to kill a bipartisan border deal instead of working across the aisle to get something done.
I thank God for my best friend and partner for 30 years, my wife, Helene. The bipartisan Senate bill doesn't have everything I wanted. I believe that Dreamers and TPS recipients should be granted a pathway to citizenship.
With such a striking contrast, our colleagues have switched over from being impeachment investigators for constitutional high crimes and misdemeanors, which is how this whole thing started, to being amateur memory specialists, giving us their drive-by diagnoses of the President of the United States, whose soaring oratory, powerful historical analysis, and devastating extemporaneous repartee with even the most skilled ninja hecklers of the Freedom Caucus were on full display at the State of the Union address last week for the whole country to see.
My amendment today would drive the bill for Ukraine. Take each dollar amount in this act is hereby reduced to zero. If we support our military, support our military. We should be funding to build up our weapons and ammunition, not to send it over to foreign countries to kill foreign peoples. And if this body was worth what it claims to be, what it is, every single one of us would be demanding peace in Ukraine between these countries, peace for these people, so that no more of them have to die. But you never hear anybody demanding peace. No, 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 no. Peace is the last thing Washington wants because it doesn't fit the business model.
I want to focus on one argument of the sponsor of this amendment, who's basically saying that if we pass this bill, we are advocating the killing of Ukrainians. That is a uniquely demented way of looking at this war. Putin invades. Putin, as we speak, is bombing and killing Ukrainian civilians. And the only thing that is reducing the number that he can kill is the Ukrainians' ability to fight back. So to look at this from a pure Russian propaganda standpoint, they invade, they bomb, they kill, and it's our fault for helping the Ukrainians defend themselves. That is the argument here against supporting Ukraine, and it literally makes no sense.
You, Mr. Secretary, have allowed over 10 million illegals, probably higher than that, could be closer to 15 million, we don't know, to invade our country. You've allowed the cartels to make billions and billions. As a matter of fact, you're probably the best business partner they could ever have. I demand that Chuck Schumer holds your impeachment trial in the Senate, because that's exactly what we should be focused on right now. Mr. Chairman, I yield the remainder of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here. I'm sorry you had to listen to a lot of misinformation right now and throughout this hearing. And I also, just for the record, you are here. You're doing a very difficult job. Even though some folks are trying to remove you from office, we know that's not going to happen. The impeachment sham against you is dead on arrival in the Senate. And so I look forward to you continuing to do a very difficult job for the country and for the administration.
I'm the son of a cop. My brothers are cops. I was a prosecutor. Law enforcement for our family is not a career, it's a way of life. It's about putting the bad guys away and keeping the community safe. And so to me, when I hear some of my colleagues, again, not all of them, but some of them on this committee thump their chest and say that they back the blue, but then they're going to call a January 6th convict a hostage, that's not back in the blue, that's back in the coup. And when some of them say that they back the blue, but the second the blue raids the house of their preferred candidate for president, that's not backing the blue, that's backing a fool. And so I'm all about supporting law enforcement and honoring them during Police Week, but we got to be consistent.
I've got some questions for you in a moment, but there's something that is imminent and I'm concerned about because it just put a target on the back of everybody in law enforcement at the federal level and the local level. And that is a statement that one of our colleagues made earlier this week. And we have jurisdiction over the FBI as well as the ATF. But Marjorie Taylor Greene of Georgia said, the Biden DOJ and FBI were planning to assassinate President Trump and gave the green light. Does everyone get it yet? What are Republicans going to do about it? This is quite a concerning statement from an elected member of Congress, because this false statement creates the pretext for violence. It suggests to Americans, who, by the way, are armed to the teeth, we're a country where the most dangerous people have access to the most dangerous weapons, and it suggests to them that their own government and the people who wear the badge are out to assassinate the former president. And I just want to first clear up this falsity, and the FBI this week has issued a statement to do that. But first and foremost, the search at Mar-a-Lago, the former president was not there, and that was intentional. So if there was an effort to assassinate the former president, they went at a time when he was not there. Second, the former president was actually treated better than most people during a raid, because the FBI didn't go in with their raid jackets. They wore polo shirts to show a little bit of respect to the former president and not make it a raid-like environment. Third, standard use of force procedures were followed during that search, as they were followed in every search, including, fourth, the same search procedures and use of force policy that was used to retrieve documents at President Biden's Delaware residence. This is a pretext for violence, and I will yield to any of my colleagues who will join me in condemning it.
My amendment reduces the salary of Samantha Power, the administrator of the United States Agency for International Development, to $1. Samantha Power is a globalist left-wing activist who uses government positions to force the regime's views on the American people and the rest of the world. Under Samantha Power, USAID has focused on food security in response to the Ukraine war, climate change, democracy, and governance. Also, under Samantha Power, USAID has installed diversity, equity, and inclusion advisors in all bureaus, offices, and overseas missions, and created an agency-wide dashboard and DEI scorecards to track staff compliance with the administration's DEI directives. These blatantly political scorecards demand ideological conformity and should have no place in the government workplace or elsewhere.
We cannot decide to defund the salary of the leadership of a United States government agency simply because a member of Congress does not agree with all of the positions the administration takes on issues pertaining to foreign affairs. If my colleagues want to debate the merits of our foreign policy, then let's do it. But it's beneath this body to really take on a public servant for just doing their job.
She can fake it for the photo ops, but we know that Kamala Harris wholeheartedly supports the chaos at our border, the chaos in our streets, and the chaos in the families who have been victims of her open border policies. Border Czar Harris outlandishly compared ICE to KKK and radically called for the ICE to be abolished. She also posted the Minnesota Freedom Fund to bail out violent Black Lives Matter terrorists who burned down cities, looted stores, destroyed communities, and caused over $2 billion in damage to American communities all over America. Kamala Harris is not only the border czar, she is also the czar of chaos. And her policies have destroyed American.
You can always tell when we're getting closer to an election because these extreme members of the Republican Party, they literally turn up the volume under xenophobia. And they're doing it again with HR 1371. They lie about immigration and public safety. I mean, when you look at studies, it shows that immigration is actually associated with lower crime rates. They fearmonger, they dehumanize, while they're also quoting scripture, which is kind of hypocritical. And they scapegoat asylum seekers, people who, just like my parents, want to seek a life of dignity and hope and have faithfully contributed to their community and to our collective economy.
Whereas the House Republican Conference elected Mike Johnson on October 25th, 2023, after 3.5 weeks of trying to decide on a new Speaker of the House.
Mr. Speaker, the House is not in order.
House will be in order. Gentlewoman from Georgia is recognized.
Whereas Mike Johnson sent the Republican conference a letter making promises as to what type of speaker he would be and outlining his plans going forward. Whereas the House Republican Conference elected Mike Johnson on October 25th, 2023, after 3.5 weeks of trying to decide on a new Speaker of the House.
Mr. Speaker, the House is not in order.
House will be in order. Gentlewoman from Georgia is recognized.
Whereas Mike Johnson sent the Republican conference a letter making promises as to what type of speaker he would be and outlining his plans going forward. Whereas Speaker Johnson allowed the conference only 1 day rather than 72 hours to review a 1,000+ page bill to which no amendments could be offered, rather than ensure total transparency, open processes, and regular order. Whereas Speaker Johnson worked with Democrats to produce appropriations text, NDAA text, and other legislative items rather than with Republicans to understand and emphasize each member's unique strengths and engage with them. Whereas Speaker Johnson relied on majority Democrat support to pass a 2-part omnibus spending bill rather than advancing a policy agenda supported by conference consensus. Whereas on December 1st, 2023, Speaker Johnson failed to protect the Republican majority when he allowed multiple votes to remove another Republican from the House of Representatives. It was unprecedented for a member to be removed from Congress by a 2/3 vote prior to conviction of a crime. To this day, the Republican expelled from the House under Speaker Johnson has not been convicted of a crime. Meanwhile, a Democrat now holds that seat. Whereas Speaker Johnson supported fully funding abortion, the trans agenda, the climate agenda, foreign wars, and Biden's border crisis, rather than ensuring liberty, opportunity, and security for all Americans. Whereas Speaker Johnson relied on Democrat votes on at least 2 occasions, with the first transgression occurring on March 22nd, 2024, with the House passage of H.Res. 1102, Part 2 of the Johnson-Schumer Omnibus, and the second transgression occurring on April 20th, 2024, with House passage of H.R. 8035, the $61 billion Ukraine funding bill. Speaker Johnson passed the first minibus appropriations bill on March 6th and passed the second minibus appropriation bill 2 weeks later on March 22nd. Whereas a 2-part omnibus split into 2 minibuses was crammed down our throats and passed under suspension of the rules with only 1 day to review it. Whereas Speaker Johnson's omnibus did nothing to stop Biden's deadly border invasion, it fully funded it. Speaker Johnson did nothing to stop the energy-killing Green New Deal climate agenda. He fully funded it. He did nothing to stop the weaponized Department of Justice and FBI. He fully funded them. He did nothing to stop the trans agenda on kids. He fully funded it. He did nothing to stop full-term abortions. He fully funded them. He did nothing to stop the fueling of forever foreign wars. He fully funded them. Excuses like, this is just how you have to govern in divided government, are pathetic, weak, and unacceptable. Even with our razor-thin Republican majority, we could have at least secured the border, with it being the #1 issue in the country and the issue that is actually causing Biden to trail President Trump in poll after poll. Minority Leader Jeffries, Nancy Pelosi, and other high-ranking Democrats have publicly stated they will save Mike Johnson from a vote to vacate him. In a recent interview, Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries said, even though we're in the minority, we effectively have been governing as if we were in the majority.
The House is not in order.
Mike Johnson is ill-equipped to handle the rigors of the job of Speaker of the House and has allowed a uniparty, one that fuels foreign wars, tramples on civil liberties, and increases our disastrous national debt, to take complete control of the House of Representatives. Whereas Speaker Johnson's tenure is defined by one self-serving characteristic, when given a choice between advancing Republican priorities or allying with the Democrats to preserve his own personal power, Johnson regularly chooses to ally himself with Democrats. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the office of the Speaker of the House of Representatives
Gentlewoman will
here.
suspend. The House will be in order. Gentlewoman's recognized.
Resolved that the office of the Speaker of the House of Representatives is hereby declared to be vacant.
The chair will now recognize the gentlewoman from Georgia to offer the resolution just noticed. Does the gentlewoman from Georgia offer the resolution?
Yes.
The clerk will report the resolution. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes. For what purpose does the gentleman from Kentucky seek recognition?
I request the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. The members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 5-minute vote. On this vote, the yeas are 359, the nays are 43, with 7 answering present. The motion is adopted. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table.
I would like to express in the strongest words possible that I support the police, and we should be supporting the police here in our nation's capital, because it's our nation's capital that has one of the highest murder rates in our country, one of the worst crime records in our nation's history, and is an absolute embarrassment to our country. This is an ongoing crime epidemic here in our nation's capital, and it's appalling. We should be supporting police officers, not attacking Americans' gun rights, while all of us walk around under the protection of good guys with guns. Capitol Police carry those AR-15s and guard all of us, but yet Democrats would love to take away the gun rights of American citizens and blame guns that never get up by themselves and shoot people. Murder is already a crime. People kill people, and they don't just kill them with guns. They kill them with knives. They kill them with fists. They kill them with objects. They strangle them. But yet I just listened to one of my colleagues say that we need to disarm Americans in order to somehow stop crime in Washington, D.C. We should
Will the gentlelady yield?
No, I will not. We should be protecting and supporting police officers. I also heard President Trump come under attack once again because Democrats have nothing else to say to defend their own policies but attack President Trump. I'd like to remind everyone that it was Antifa, BLM, by the way, supported by Democrats. BLM as an organization raised millions and millions of dollars on Act Blue, the Democrat fundraising site. And then BLM riots across America that were endorsed heavily by Democrats and apologized and said mostly peaceful protests by media who are totally defending Democrats constantly. These riots caused $2 billion in damage across America. I'd also like to remind everyone that in 2017, when President Trump was inaugurated, that rioters nearly burned down Washington, D.C. That's right, nearly burned down the city here. But oh, we've got to attack President Trump every single day. And I would urge my colleagues to pay attention very carefully. The American people are paying attention, and they're not stupid. Just because you have a little microphone you can talk in doesn't mean that you can sit here and lie to the American people every single day. They can read the crime statistics. We all know you can't walk around this city
without being in danger of being robbed or carjacked or murdered maybe. My goodness, how horrible is that? So let's support our police officers. Let's vote for good things to help citizens in this city. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Will the gentlelady yield for a question?
No, I will not yield to one of your stupid questions that are always attacking me and attacking President Trump.
How about a mediocre question?
No, I don't want it. I do not want
An
your
excellent question?
No.
A smart question?
No, my time
An intelligent
is
question?
You have no smart or intelligent questions.
Chair now recognizes Mr. Garcia for 5 minutes.
Thank you. That was a lot. I want to remind the gentlelady that it was her that actually organized a trip to the DC jail to hug and high five and sit with the insurrectionists that actually attacked our Capitol. So if we're talking about the safety of DC and the Capitol, it's just quite, I think, ironic. This is all facts. This is quite ironic that the insurrectionists that tried to overthrow our government in the capital city were being coddled. We're actually being coddled by. It's quite a shame that you call them political prisoners or hostages. I think maybe you called them. They actually try to overthrow our government. Let me continue with my time.
She's not recognized.
Thank you. So I think it's quite interesting that my colleague trying to talk about the safety of D.C. When she literally supported an insurrection and attack on the Capitol. And if she's so interested in fixing Washington, D.C., maybe she should run for mayor of D.C. It's what she seems to be interested in. She's obsessed with everything going on. I just want to remind folks that D.C. and the district has a mayor. They have a city council. They're trying to pass regulations. They're trying to work. There's definitely challenges. They're working very hard on those. And overall, let's remember that crime all across the country has actually decreased over the last couple of years. It has not increased, it's decreased. And with that, I yield back my time.
Wait, Mr. Would you yield?
Absolutely.
Thank you very much for your trenchant remarks, Mr. Garcia. Trying to pierce through the fog of propaganda, confusion, disinformation, and just lies that we just heard, the distinguished gentlelady, who I'd be very happy to yield some of my time to answer the question, started off by complaining about the murder rate in Washington, the carjacking in Washington, and gun violence. And the question that I wanted to pose to the gentlelady, which she anticipated as a stupid question, was simply what she thinks in this legislation that we're here to discuss, 5798, will bring down the murder rate, or bring down carjacking, or bring down gun violence in Washington. Because the sole purpose of the legislation, as I can read it, is simply to say that the chief of police no longer has disciplinary authority over his or her own police force, but instead it will be subject to collective bargaining. Now, that might be a great policy for the gentlelady's district in Georgia. I'd be interested to know where the municipalities in her district are on that question. But in any event, the people of Washington, D.C. have dealt with this repeatedly. We've got a letter right here, which I submitted for the record, from 12 out of 13 members of the D.C. City Council saying, please don't change our law. We have the statements of 4 different chiefs of police saying, please don't change our law. We've got cops who've been convicted of sexual violence, sexual assault, domestic violence, and I'm not even certain the gentlelady from Georgia understood what she was speaking for, because she was talking about the murder rate and carjacking, and unless she's saying that police officers who may be removed from the force in D.C. for having committed a sexual assault or domestic violence are more likely to help bring down the murder rate, then her remarks are completely nonsensical. It was much ado about nothing. So thank you for allowing me to make that point. I yield back to you, Mr. Garcia.
Would the gentleman yield to a question?
Sure.
You mentioned that crime was down nationwide. Then why isn't it down in Washington, D.C.? You have any idea?
I mean, let me just say, I served as mayor of a city of 500,000 people for 8 years. Crime trends go up and down. You look at overall crime rates, you look at violent crime. Crime overall across the country has gone down. Not everywhere. There are areas of Kentucky and other places in the country that crime has gone up. But why? But if we're so focused on just D.C., then we should focus on places like Kentucky and Arkansas and Texas and other cities where crime is also slightly going up.
Well, and if the gentleman would yield on
Absolutely.
that point, there have been increases in different categories in crime in the gentlelady's own state that she represents, Georgia. If collective bargaining is the solution to that, would she support collective bargaining for public workers in Georgia? Because it's not allowed there. And she doesn't seem to understand that she just became a champion of collective bargaining and the right to organize a union. And I would invite her to come back to proclaim her new pro-union sympathies publicly for her own state as well.
Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to enter information for the record.
What's the information?
Oh, my God.
State the information.
Thank you.
I reserve the right to object. The minority has not provided a copy of the material for the record. In the past, she's displayed pornography. Is pornography allowed to be, are pornographic photos allowed to be displayed in this committee room, Mr. Chairman?
It's not pornography.
Okay, well, you're the expert. I'll
I'm not an expert, Mr. Raskin.
Seems like it.
Mr. Chairman, I object to the unanimous
Mr. Chairman,
request.
Mr. Chairman.
Hold
All you
on.
need is one objection.
We need decorum. Chair recognizes Ms. Greene.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to talk about the importance of Hunter Biden obeying his subpoena and some of the evidence that we had questions about today when we had arranged with Hunter Biden and his attorneys for him to come in. Then he evaded his subpoena, and there's serious evidence that needs to be discussed. That has to do with many of the bank reports that we had read in the Treasury, outlining very serious crimes that Hunter Biden had committed or has allegedly committed, and then we have evidence of that. Crimes of Mann Act violation, human trafficking, these were in the bank reports, and the American people deserve to know about it. Here's another excerpt from a bank report.
Mr. Chairman, what is
talking about a victim in California. I reclaim my
Hold on
time.
one moment, Ms. Greene. State your point, Mr. Goldman.
what is the gentle lady just showing to the cameras?
This is her 5 minutes on your amendment.
Well, if it's the suspicious activity reports, there was an agreement with the Treasury Department that the committee would not disclose the information.
It's my understanding what she's showing has already been disclosed in the public long before we started this investigation.
So this is in the public domain?
Yeah.
Is that your representation?
Is that a verbal representation? It's in the public domain?
This is in the public domain. I reclaim my time. Victim 1 is a California resident currently employed with FSS Management between June 2018 October 2021. Victim 1, Hunter Biden's victim, was employed by Owasco PC as evidenced by her receipt of bi-weekly payroll remittances from Owasco PC. However, during this same period of time, victim 1 also received large round dollar wires from Owasco PC, which reference new hire, K-wage, 10K golf member, and pay. Victim 1 received 5 wires totaling $44,508 in a 4-month period between June 12, 2018 and October 2nd, 2018. These are reports that are calling so-called employees of Hunter Biden and his law firm victims. And here's evidence of Hunter Biden violating the Mann Act. This is trafficking women across state lines for prostitution. This is an airplane ticket showing that it was purchased by Hunter Biden for this victim, where she flew from Los Angeles to Washington, D.C., and then the next day flew back to Los Angeles. The date is she flew in from Los Angeles on June 14th, 2018, and was flown back to Los Angeles the following day. And this is pictures that Hunter Biden had produced and uploaded to porn websites, and it's marked out.
Mr. Chairman, point of parliamentary inquiry.
Showing proof of Mann
Okay.
Act violations. Democrats should not be offended by pictures
Mr.
that
Chairman,
black out.
have I been
things.
recognized?
They should be
Objection. I have
offended
a
by
point of
actual
parliamentary
human
inquiry.
trafficking.
Mr.
All
Chairman.
right, but state your point.
Thank you kindly, Mr. Chairman. On July 26th, I sent you a letter about the last time this happened when the gentlelady introduced before this committee without any notice to anyone nude photos, pornographic images that were completely irrelevant to the purpose of the hearing itself. And my question to you is, are members allowed to simply put up sensationalistic, voyeuristic, pornographic images if they're not relevant to the actual object of the legislative proceeding? I want a parliamentary ruling on that.
Mr. Raskin, that's probably part of the questioning for Mr. Biden, violations of the Mann Act. Ms. Greene's led on that issue.
No, this is a
These
question
are
of
already,
the rules
these
of the
have
committee.
these pictures have already been entered into the record.
So in other words, you have accepted the idea that members can introduce irrelevant, sexually based, voyeuristic...
How is this irrelevant?
Well,
how does it relate to Joe Biden?
How does it relate to...
We're not doing a criminal investigation of Hunter Biden.
We've had
Point of order, Mr. Chairman. Point of order.
Testified in the FBI, DOJ, IRS that they were told to stand down investigating various crimes of the Biden family.
Okay.
Did Joe Biden tell them to stand down? Who told the IRS, the FBI, and everyone else to stand down? This is what we're investigating.
None of
Reclaiming my time, Mr. Chairman.
I believe it's my time.
No,
I'm reclaiming my time.
I have been
stop the clock.
I
You're
object.
good.
I object to the use of this exhibit, Mr. Chairman. This is not a criminal investigation of the Mann Act or prostitution or anything else. It's completely irrelevant to a subpoena, the validity of that subpoena, and whether or not there's been compliance with that subpoena. It's totally extraneous, immaterial, and irrelevant. And someone should explain that to Ms. Greene if she doesn't understand.
Point of parliamentary inquiry.
And let the chair rule. You had a point of order. The chair's rule.
I
This
object
is
to the use
evidence.
of this-
You objected. We got that. Evidence that Hunter is a material witness in this investigation.
Well, does
Now-
that mean you can put up pornographic pictures of other people that Hunter Biden has met in his life? I mean, come on. Like, how far does that go? It's not relevant to your motion.
Well, you can ask him that in the
It's
deposition.
not relevant. No, honestly, Mr. Chairman, it's not relevant to your motion of whether or not he violated that subpoena. How do those naked pictures have been?
Mr. Chairman, point of order.
This is not the Jerry Springer
Take your
show.
point.
This is the United States House of Representatives.
And let me
Come
say
on.
this.
Talked
Let me
about a
say
bunch of
this.
things
It's
today
not
that weren't
pornography. It's appropriately censored evidence in an ongoing investigation.
Yes.
Okay? It's appropriately censored evidence in an ongoing investigation.
Censored.
Mr.
All right, I
Biggs
just want to
raised
say,
a point.
pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 17, I object to the use of this exhibit as irrelevant, extraneous, sensationalistic, voyeuristic, and totally antithetical to the legislative purposes of this committee and this House. This is not the Jerry Springer show. Yield back.
And again, this information is extremely important because Hunter Biden refused to obey his subpoena, and we are holding him in contempt of Congress for doing so. This is important evidence of human trafficking, Mann Act violations that we had questions for the president's son about. And there's evidence. I'd like to show the evidence of payments. These are payments made from Hunter Biden and his law firm to so-called assistants. These were not assistants. These are prostitutes that he was trafficking. And I think these victims are important. And just because our Democrat colleagues don't like the evidence doesn't mean that it's not relevant. And I'm especially offended by the women on this committee that don't care about these women's rights. They're victims of Hunter Biden.
Mr. Chairman, just a point of order. I didn't want to interrupt the good lady, but 2 points here. One is the majority has purported to be in possession of the laptop, and you're supposed to share all evidence with us. We've been asking for a year. Will you make the laptop available to the Democrats so we can look at it? The guy who originally apparently leaked it has said he can't vouch for anything they're talking about because he doesn't understand the chain of custody. We don't know who made those pictures. We don't know who made those statements. if it's coming from the laptop. We don't know where it's coming from. So please, could you please share with us what you've got?
If I can interject, I can give you a copy of it. Marco Polo has the actual entire publication. We can get every single Democrat member a copy of that.
Well, I want to get at least the copy that the majority's using. I don't even know what Marco Polo is.
I will get you. I promise. Like, I'm not trying to be rude. I will.
Well,
get you. A copy.
you mentioned you wanted to read some stuff. That would probably be something good to read, the Marco Polo report.
But what about your copy? Because you know you have an obligation under the rules to share with us any evidence you claim to have. So as far as we know, all that stuff is completely confected. It's just made up. It's
with all due respect, Mr. Raskin, you spent a lot of time investigating the former president, and you haven't spent any time on this. The American people are keeping up with this investigation.
We want to investigate.
But you all are 3 or 4 steps behind.
Give us the evidence.
So Ms. Greene's time.
Okay.
Ms. Greene's time has expired. Does anyone else wish to speak on the Goldman Amendment?
I now recognize Ms. Greene from Georgia for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Fauci, you were quoted on CBS Face the Nation saying it's easy to criticize, but they're really criticizing science because I represent science. Do you represent science, Mr. Fauci?
I am a scientist who uses the scientific method to gain information.
Yes, you said you represent science. Do you represent science, Mr. Fauci? Yes
Again,
or no? Yes or no?
No, that's not a yes or no
Yes,
answer.
it's a yes or no.
I don't think it is.
Okay, well, we'll take that as a you don't know what you represent.
Oh,
But this, as director of the NIH, you did sign off on these so-called scientific experiments. And as a dog lover, I want to tell you this is disgusting and evil, what you signed off on, and these experiments that happened to beagles paid for by the American taxpayer. And I want you to know Americans don't pay their taxes for animals to be tortured like this. So the type of science that you are representing, Mr. Fauci, is abhorrent, and it needs to stop. Mr. Fauci, you also represent the type of science where you confess that you made up the COVID rules, including
I didn't hear what you
6
said.
feet social distancing and masking of children.
I never said I made anything up.
You admitted that you made it up. You
I
made it
didn't
up
say
as you went.
I made it up.
So are you saying this is fake news, Mr. Fauci?
I didn't say I made anything up.
What did you say?
I said that it is not based in science and it just appeared.
But this is science.
What does dogs have to do with anything that we're talking about today?
These are scientific experiments. This is what you signed off on. But you also told the American people they had to distance by 6 feet. They had to wear masks. But let's also talk a little bit further about the type of science that you represent. NIH scientists made $710 million in royalties from drug makers, a fact that's been hidden. Let's talk about the fact about, is it right for scientists and doctors getting paid by the American people, government taxpayer paychecks, to get patents where they're paid millions and hundreds of millions of dollars in royalty fees, especially when the NIH and these government agencies, most powerful agencies in our country, are recommending medical suggestions and advice and making up guidelines like 6 feet distancing and masking of children. Do you think that's appropriate? Do the American people deserve to be abused like that, Mr. Fauci? Because you're not doctor, you're Mr. Fauci in my few minutes. No, I don't need your answer. I want to talk about this right here.
Mr. Chairman,
Fauci,
objection.
I reclaim
Mr.
my
Chairman,
time.
objection.
I reclaim my time. I reclaim my time, Mr. Raskin.
Gentlelady will suspend.
Mr. Chairman,
Point of order.
Just in terms of the rules of decorum, are we allowed to deny that a doctor is a doctor just because we don't want him to be a doctor?
Yes, because in my time, that man does not deserve to have a license. As a matter of fact, it should be revoked, and he belongs in
Gentlelady will
prison.
suspend. The gentlelady should recognize the doctor as a doctor.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, is this what we have become? Is this what we have devolved into? No decorum.
You know what? We can do that hearing about the poor men that were injected with syphilis because I support you in that. That's horrific. And this government that does things like that to Americans doesn't have decorum to the American people.
Mr. Chairman,
The gentleman is out of
point of regular order, please.
The gentleman is out of order.
Decorum.
I recognize the point of order. Go ahead with your point of order.
You got it.
No, I mean, I was going to say what Representative Raskin said. That's completely unacceptable to be able to deny Dr. Fauci, who's here, a respected member of the medical community, his title. And that's actually a personal attack on his character.
And I have instructed her.
He's not respected.
And I've instructed her to address him as a doctor.
I'm not
Gentlelady
addressing
shall
him as
continue.
doctor. Let's talk about
Mr. Chairman,
this.
I
I'm
would
reclaiming
move that the
my
woman's
time. I'm reclaiming my time.
Words get taken
I'm
down.
reclaiming my time.
Second that.
Point of order.
Suspend. A member can only move to have words. I'm sorry. The issues we are debating are important ones that members feel deeply about. And while vigorous disagreement is part of the legislative process, as I said at the beginning, members are reminded that we must adhere to established standards of decorum in debate. This is a reminder that it is a violation of House rules and the rules of this committee to engage in personalities regarding other members or to question the motives of a colleague. Remarks of that type are not permitted by the rules and are not in keeping with the best traditions of our committee. The chair will enforce these rules of decorum at all times and urges all members to be mindful of their remarks. Does the gentleman from California have anything further?
We should have to take her words down.
Yeah, I made it. I offered that her words be taken down, Mr. Chair.
Point of order, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a point of order.
Mr.
Because
Griffin
they
is
accused us
Mr.
of
Griffin is
worshiping
Gentlelady
President Trump. We don't worship President Trump.
Gentlelady will suspend. I now recognize Mr. Garcia from California for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Fauci, I am so sorry you just had to sit through that. That was completely irresponsible. Quite frankly, we're hearing, this might be the most insane hearing I've actually attended. I've only been in Congress for a year and a half, but I am so sorry that you are subjected to those level of attacks and insanity. Your quote-unquote so-called science that the gentlewoman is referring to has saved millions of lives in this country and around the world, and I want to thank you for that. I also think it's important to note that, in my opinion, is that you are an American hero and your team has done more to save lives than all 435 members of this body on both sides of the aisle. You guys have worked not just during this pandemic, but over time to save millions of lives in this country and across the world. We lost 1.1 million American lives. 1.1 million American lives, 7 million lives around the world. We were having 9/11-like events, death events daily in this country, losing 4,000, 5,000 people every single day. I was mayor during the time of the pandemic. I remember how painful it was to close businesses, to shut down schools, but how quickly we forget the pain and how scared we were as a country. We were washing our groceries as they were coming in. We were keeping seniors at a distance. The tragedy that was happening in our nursing homes. Thousands of people were dying a day, and you and your team of the best and the brightest scientists in this country and the world were doing everything that you could and working night and day to save more and more of those lives. A lot of my colleagues know that my mom was a healthcare worker during the pandemic. My mom died of COVID. My stepfather died of COVID. I lost both of my parents during the pandemic. So I take this very personally, especially when other members of this body who are tasked to be responsible and to actually help the American people attack medical professionals like you and across the world. Vaccines, the vaccine that you and your team helped foster have saved millions of American lives. These attacks are ridiculous. I want to ask you a question. I want to be crystal clear for the public. You brought together the world and America's best scientists. Do you believe that the vaccine that you all helped create and ensure is safe and effective for the public?
Yes, and its track record has proven that.
And do you also agree that it saved hundreds of thousands and possibly millions of lives in America and across the world?
That is absolutely correct, and it's very clear that it's saved millions of lives here and throughout the world. The Europeans have done the same studies that we have, and the data are incontrovertible that they save lives.
Sir, and do you think the American public should listen to America's brightest and best doctors and scientists, or instead listen to podcasters, conspiracy theorists, and unhinged Facebook memes?
No, listening to people who you just described is going to do nothing but harm people because they will deprive themselves of life-saving interventions, which has happened. And you know, some have done studies Peter Hotez has done an analysis of this and shows that in people who refuse to get vaccinated for any variety of reasons, probably responsible for an additional 200,000 to 300,000 deaths in this country.
Thank you, sir, and your entire team for saving lives in this country. And I'm sorry you have to continue going on with these attacks. I yield back. Oh, thank you. You're not allowed to speak.
You're not allowed.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, could you have her removed from
Yes.
the
Thank you.
Yes,
Have her removed.
please.
Excuse me, I ask the Capitol Police to escort.
Yep, thank you. She can be removed. Yeah, you can be removed. Actually, you're not allowed to speak.
Your time has
Take your
expired.
Starbucks with you.
Mr. Garcia, Mr. Raskin, you're out of line. Your times have expired.
Today, this body says the most important thing we can do, no, is not reduce spending. That's not it. Not to do anything to drive down inflation. Oh, no, we can't do that for the American people. It's not to secure our own border that is invaded every single day, by people from over 160 different countries. No, don't secure the American border. Let everyone in. We have over 1.8 million known gotaways. We don't know who these people are. And yet you have members of this body talking big and tough about, oh, we have to defeat Russia. Oh, we have to protect Ukraine. But yet all of you are unwilling to protect the American citizens that pay your paycheck, pay the light bills in this building, and pay for this entire federal government. For what? For nothing. Ukraine is not even a member of NATO. Ukraine is not a member of NATO. But the most important thing you hear in Washington, D.C. is, oh, we have to spend Americans' hard-earned tax dollars over to Ukraine and keep the money going to continue to murder Ukrainians, wipe out an entire generation of Ukrainian men so that there are widows, there are fatherless orphans, there are not enough men to work in their industries. Oh, but you really support Ukraine. Wow, what kind of support is that? It's repulsive. You know, shame on the American government.
In the post-World War II construct, the United States is a witness to the world on the values of democracy and freedom. These values have provided the United States of America with strong allies across the globe. It has helped our partners in Europe and NATO to support Ukraine against Vladimir Putin's unjust war. If we do not provide munitions, Ukraine will fall and Putin will be emboldened. And the Greene Amendment allows Putin to control Europe, abdicating our leadership role, and promises to our allies cannot happen. We must support Ukraine's defense. The world prior to World War II was unstable, with authoritarian fascist leaders seeking power, and voting no on this amendment will ensure that history does not, in fact, repeat itself. I urge all of you to vote no. I reserve the balance of my time.
If you want peace, give the Ukrainians the strength to stop Putin. He is the one that will not come to the bargaining table right now because he thinks he's winning. He thinks he can go all the way to Kyiv. He thinks he can take the whole country. If we give the Ukrainians the ability to stop him, that forces him to the table. It makes no sense to say that giving the Ukrainians the ability to defend themselves is what's killing them, when it is very clearly the Russians that are killing them. And I would also note that no president has added more to the deficit in one 4-year, or the debt, sorry, in one 4-year term than President Trump. And I didn't hear a single Republican complaining about the debt or the deficit during that period of time. The Ukrainians need our help to bring peace, to stop Putin, to stop what he is trying to do. Also, to Ms. McCollum's point, this also helps our industrial base. We face a dangerous world between Russia, Iran, China, North Korea, all of whom are working together, by the way. If we don't help Ukraine stop Russia, that helps Iran, that helps China, that helps North Korea. This is about our national security, which I am quite confident that whether asleep or awake, the American people also care dearly about. Please defeat this amendment and support Ukraine and support United States national security interests. Thank you. I yield back.
Members are reminded in House decorum.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida rise? I said, no. The gentlewoman from Florida.
Stand up.
Okay. The gentlewoman is not recognized. Colleagues, no, I'm going to. The House will be in order. On this vote, the yeas are 311 and the nays are 112. The bill is passed. Oh, one voting present. I missed it, but thank you. Okay. The House will be in order.
I will yield to any colleague who will condemn the suggestion by Marjorie Taylor Greene that the FBI was out to assassinate former President Trump. Please condemn it, because if you don't, you are encouraging it, and you're co-signing it. Mr. McClintock, please.
Of course we do. What a ridiculous question.
What a ridiculous statement that she made.
I agree with you, and I don't
you.
think there's anyone here who agrees with it.
Thank you.
Both sides have a lunatic fringe in their movement, ours and yours. And frankly, I find yours far more frightening because
I've never heard somebody suggest that we were trying to that the FBI was trying to assassinate a former president. I do appreciate, Mr. McClintock, you condemning. I would welcome anyone else who would condemn that. And we'll make this clearer when the Attorney
I would
General
also, however,
testifies.
condemn the instructions
And
to
reclaiming
use
my
lethal
time,
force
reclaiming my time,
in such an operation,
reclaiming
or
my time,
conducting such
Director,
an operation at all.
reclaiming my time. Director, the former president stated last week at an NRA convention that every single Biden attack on gun owners and manufacturers will be terminated on my first week in office, perhaps my first day. I have a 7-year-old, a 5-year-old, and a 2-year-old. What does this mean for parents in America as it relates to whether our kids are going to be sheltering in place and hiding under their desks for the rest of their time at school, if this were to happen?
Congressman, I can't and won't get involved in electoral politics. What I said in my opening statement, though, I think hopefully people from all sides of questions can agree on, which is we see progress being made. We see violent crime going down. We have a strategy that appears to be working. My hope is that we can all come together, and maybe there's policy disagreements on different things. We can all come together, though, on the fact that we are driving down violent crime all over this country and double down on the strategies that are working. That's my hope. The things that are working, let's stick with, because the numbers show that real lives are being saved.
Thank you, and I yield back.
Mr. Berry, do you agree with the Supreme Court's rationale and analysis in the Bruin decision?
So I'm not deeply familiar with it, but I directionally, what I understand, it seems to construe the Second Amendment as a robust individual right.
And would you consider it to be a strict constructionist interpretation of the Second Amendment?
My impression is that it attempts to be a faithful exploration of the original public meaning of the Second Amendment.
The original public meaning. Okay. Just so everyone is aware, the Bruin decision interpreted the Second Amendment to only allow for gun regulation that existed at the time, or could have existed in 1789, when the Second Amendment was ratified. And of course, there were no machine guns, there were no bump stocks, the list goes on as to many, many technological advances that did not exist then. But it is the original meaning. Ms. Wiley, if we're going to talk about the original meaning of the actual black letter law, was there any evidence in 1964 of pervasive discrimination against white people?
No.
So it's fair to say this Title VII was, of course, not written because to right the wrongs of discrimination against white people in 1964.
That's correct.
So if one were to use the original meaning at the time that something was ratified or enacted, then discrimination against whites would not be included as a cognizable claim under Title VII. Is that right?
No, because it is true that Title VII prevents all forms of racial discrimination. The reality of why the law was drafted and passed in the first place was because there were no protections that recognized that black people, that Native Americans, that Pacific Islanders, that other people of color who were not being protected by government from discrimination deserve to be protected by government from discrimination. Because what was happening for 100 years after the winning of a civil war to create true equal opportunity is that it was formally and constantly denied people because they were not white.
I agree with you.
So it didn't make it okay to discriminate against white people. It just made it clear you can't allow it against everyone
So
else.
it was, I'm making somewhat of a rhetorical point because I do agree with you that we should not have discrimination based on race. I just want to point out the hypocrisy and the convenience that folks on the other side of the aisle like to use in a cynical way black letter law and the original meaning of things when it's convenient, but not when it's not convenient.
I don't think anyone stood in line to pick their race or chose if they wanted to be a man or a woman or what color hair or any kind of physical feature before they were born. That's not something that any of us picked. But I will say that America has gotten a lot of things right, and Title VII of the Civil Rights Act has done an incredible job with the black letter law. And it's being violated every single day.
The fact of the matter is that 82% of business leaders consider diversity initiatives to be essential to their business strategy. 2% of business leaders say that these initiatives are not important. Diversity initiatives are credited with improving business performance, enhancing talent acquisition and retention, enhancing competitiveness, and fostering innovation. And 45% of business leaders said that the main reason they have diversity initiatives is to improve business performance. This is motivated by businesses, and it is demanded by consumers, just like ESD. And so if Republicans profess to be the party of deregulation and free markets, why won't you just let the market decide whether diversity and inclusion or ESD is something that the market wants? Why do you now want regulation? The fact of the matter is you want regulation because you want to go back to the white replacement theory and a time when, in 1964, we needed to pass a law to protect discrimination against people of color and underserved and marginalized groups, not against white people. And it is a shame that this entire Project 2025 includes attacks on immigrants and the expulsion of immigrants and the exclusion of immigrants who make up so much of our economy and are essential to so many aspects, both from agricultural workers to highly skilled workers with H-1B visas. And so I wish that we would have some consistency from the other side of the aisle in how we view diversity that as we approach with Project 2025, with immigration, and with our employment laws. And I yield back.
To just level and remind people why we're here. The reason DEIA policies were even created was to right existing wrongs. The reality is that we have some members of this committee who were alive during Jim Crow. They experienced segregation firsthand, yet now they're acting like we are suddenly in a colorblind society, that we don't need to codify protections, or that the only victims here are wealthy or the white or the privileged. How easily we forget. But we know statistically that they're not the ones whose communities have been intentionally polluted or targeted by police or the war on drugs. Their neighborhoods have not been redlined. Their schools have not been decimated by racist, inequitable funding schemes that commonwealths like Pennsylvania, my own, are finally recognizing as harmful and attempting to fix. Lest we forget, the reason HBCUs and other minority-serving institutions exist is because we weren't accepted into predominantly white institutions. They are not targeted by how they look or how they dress or how their hair grows. Truthfully, we recognize that this crusade has been going on since, indeed, the passage of the 14th Amendment, if not earlier. Every time black folks or brown folks or women or queer folks or the disabled are able to achieve some semblance of equity, we continue to be demonized or face ad hominem attacks. So we didn't earn our spot, or we don't belong here. To ensure that they can continue to concentrate wealth and power with the few.
When Samantha Power served as Obama's ambassador to the United Nations, she made hundreds of requests to intelligence agencies to unmask names associated with the 2016 Trump campaign in order to support the Russia hoax narrative. For her activism, the Biden administration granted Samantha Power a permanent seat on the National Security Council, a more prominent role than the USAID administrator she has had under previous administrations. A person who abuses her position in government to meddle in democratic elections should be nowhere near public office. Instead of fulfilling her role as an administrator, Samantha Power is focused on imposing a left-wing agenda throughout the entire U.S. government and its proxies around the world. My amendment will ensure that she is held accountable and that the American people no longer have to fund her salary. Mr. Speaker, I yield the remainder of my time.
Gentlewoman from Georgia yields.
Mr. Chairman,
Purpose
I claim
to the woman,
the time in opposition to this amendment.
The gentlewoman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise in strong opposition to this amendment. This amendment seeks to punish administrative power likely due to differences of opinion with the amendment sponsor. Given the administrator covers all worldwide issues, it's natural that differing opinions would arise. Administrative power is a patriot. She cares about inclusion. She wants diversity and equity and inclusion reflected as a policy in the State Department so that the State Department and so countries reflect the diversity not only of our own country but throughout the world. That means people like myself that would be part of this program. And so her distinguished career has been very distinguished, serving as our ambassador to the United Nations, to being a Pulitzer Prize-winning author. So I think we should thank Samantha Power for trying to make sure that our USAID is inclusive and that it reflects our democracy. If my colleagues want to debate the merits of our foreign policy, then let's do it. But it's beneath this body to really take on a public servant for just doing their job. I urge my colleagues to oppose this amendment, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlelady has the only time.
I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentlewoman from Georgia. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to.
Mr. Chairman, I request a recorded vote.
The recorded vote being requested pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18. Further proceedings on this amendment offered by the gentlewoman from Georgia will be postponed.
Mr. Reagan, you unveiled a new rule this year, a climate regulation. The rule's designed to ensure that the majority of new passenger cars and light trucks sold in the United States are all electric or hybrids by 2032, and that's approximately 8 years from now. This is an absurd regulation on tailpipe emissions limits imposed by the EPA. Inflation is so high right now, so high. Many Americans aren't able to even buy a new car right now. They're not able to buy a home. They can hardly afford their rent. Because of the rules that you are imposing, this is going to crush Americans' ability to even be able to afford a car and send us back into the time before people could afford cars, and I can't even imagine that.
Thank you kindly, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to Administrator Regan for joining us here today. It's another brutal summer in Washington, but as we say on Capitol Hill, it's not the heat, it's the stupidity. And Americans today face the accelerating ravages of the climate crisis, including extreme heat waves. Last year was the hottest year on record in more than 100,000 years. And the hottest year before that was the prior year. And the hottest year before that was the year before that. So we're talking about record extreme heat, record violent flooding, record wildfires destroying millions of acres of land in the West, record velocity hurricanes and tornadoes. And yet, a lot of our colleagues are still in denial. In fact, their Project 2025 plan for America would ban the use of the word climate change. They want to delete the possibility of even talking about climate change, much less taking any action on it. Millions of Americans are suffering the health effects of legacy pollution, dangerous air quality, and other kinds of toxic contamination. The work of the EPA has never been more urgent. Under the presidential administration of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, the EPA has taken decisive action to put the health of the people before the profits of polluters and to confront climate change and toxic contamination of our communities. This includes new rules limiting pollution from coal and natural gas power plants. It includes a new rule limiting pollution from chemical plants that will reduce cancer risks for vulnerable communities, new rules for cars and trucks that will cut pollutants and reduce premature deaths, heart attacks, asthma, and fuel costs for Americans, and sweeping efforts to protect our population from lead and carcinogens in the drinking water. Our colleagues who support a twice-impeached convicted felon for president would have us believe that EPA's agenda is a radical one. The agenda we should be concerned about is Donald Trump's radical, anti-science, corporate polluter agenda, which he would give away to big gas and big coal and big oil for $1 billion in campaign contributions. The week before last, the Supreme Court gutted the Chevron doctrine, which will invite the justices now to impose their policy preferences over the agencies that are working to implement congressional will. And with last week's Corner Post decision, the court's extremists rejected decades of precedent to open federal agencies up to what Supreme Court Justice Jackson described as a tsunami of lawsuits that threaten to devastate the functioning of the federal government. These cases were backed by dark money, corporate power interests, including the Koch network and the Chamber of Commerce, both who come to lobby against environmental rules that are being adopted by the EPA. These are just the latest GOP attacks on the environmental protections that Americans want and need. According to a recent Gallup poll, a sweeping majority of Americans believe climate change is real and that we need to act on pollution of our air and our water and destabilization of the climate. Yet just 2 months ago, Trump met with big oil executives and lobbyists to sell out U.S. energy policy. At a steak dinner, Trump told big oil and big gas CEOs that in exchange for $1 billion contribution to his campaign, he would roll back environmental rules that protect us from unchecked pollution by the fossil fuel industry. We sent a letter to these CEOs in order to get more information about what happened at that dinner, and I'm still hoping and waiting for our colleagues to join us in getting to the bottom of that. The extremist Republican anti-environment agenda is laid out clearly in the infamous Project 2025 playbook, which would pick up where the Trump administration left off by gutting clean energy programs, repealing environmental rules, and eviscerating the EPA's budget and staff in their ability to act against pollution. To anybody who doubts the role that environmental rules and the EPA has played, I suggest looking at the Cuyahoga River near Cleveland, Ohio. In 1969, this river was one of the most polluted waterways in the country, and it actually caught on fire. A river caught on fire. That catastrophe and its health consequences led to the creation of the EPA and enactment of the Clean Water Act that our colleagues now want to undermine and destroy. Here is what the Cuyahoga River looked like before the EPA existed, and this is the America that some politicians want us to go back to, a time when the rivers were so polluted that prolonged exposure to the water would result in an emergency room visit. Now, on the other hand, after decades of work with local and state governments and communities, here is what the Cuyahoga River looks like today. We can literally see the physical difference made by the work of the EPA. This is what we've been able to do with the Clean Water Act and the Clean Air Act and the muscular enforcement that both the right-wing MAGA court and the right-wing MAGA Congress want to destroy and reverse. While extreme Republicans continue to prioritize big oil and corporate polluters over the health and safety of our people, and as our health and environmental protections are dismantled before our eyes by the Supreme Court, it's essential that we back the EPA and we sound the alarm about this attack on essential environmental regulations. The American people need to know the truth about what's at stake and what it means for our future. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Since being appointed by border czar by President Joe Biden, Kamala Harris has undoubtedly been a complete failure in her job and has destroyed our country by releasing a record-setting levels of criminals, rapists, and terrorists into our communities. Despite the attempts of the fake news media to whitewash her appointment as border czar, as Axios correctly reported, and they're now lying and say they never did, she was in fact labeled a border czar by nearly every major news outlet across the country. Border czar Kamala Harris said, "Do not come," yet proudly welcomed 11.5 million illegals from over 160 countries, including over 2 million known gotaways who completely evaded U.S. authorities. She stood by and allowed these people to come in and idly watched our children and women being raped by illegal alien criminals. She's not just allowing them to come. The policies of the administration allow the CBP One app to import over 400,000 illegals into American communities. Under her watch as border czar, this has happened.
As I walked in here, all I heard was what I hear in committee: constant criminalizing of immigrant communities. And so let me tell you, I rise in strong opposition to House Resolution 1371. What this is: more lies, more representations, and more inaccuracies. When the majority cannot pass bills, what do? They introduce blatantly political resolutions that consistently target powerful women of color. They are willing to vilify and misrepresent the sitting vice president of the United States for her diplomatic work to address the root cause of migration from Central America. If my Republican colleagues actually cared about immigration or border security, they would address the conditions that drive people to the southern border. They would pass spending bills that invest in foreign humanitarian assistance and international development programs, and they would participate in cooperative efforts to realize a world where people can build their life they want back at home. But they've done none of that. Just this week, I didn't see any of my Republican colleagues at my Congressional Caucus on Global Migration. Instead, they want us to waste our time on legislative gimmicks and sham resolutions to score cheap political points. Enough. Seriously, enough. We've been here, we've done this, it's deja vu. I am tired.
I yield, gentlelady, an additional 30 seconds.
Gentlelady is recognized for 30 seconds.
They continue to shelve their mass deportation BS. And I'm so tired of it. Let's get to solutions. We should be talking about appropriations. We should be talking about how we make sure that things are working for the American people instead of criminalizing people that are helping us boost our economy. So let's vote no on House Resolution 1371, and let's be done with this waste of time. I yield back to the ranking member.